Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering. Disney CEO says we burned $4 billion on streaming by overspending on TV shows. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from The Hollywood Reporter, Bob Iger reflects on Disney's streaming launch. Quote, "We invested too much." Bob Iger, Disney CEO, at an investor conference today, made some stunning admissions. We know there's been a lot of mismanagement at Disney, but Bob Iger goes into some greater detail than I've ever seen before, with some very specific numbers on how Disney has screwed up their business. This isn't about how they're handling their brands. This isn't about them pushing propaganda in their brands. That is a serious problem, and they've permanently damaged the Disney brand. Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm, everything under their control has been damaged because they've tried to update them and even update them simultaneously. But that's not what this is about. This is about how they launched their streaming business in such a careless and sloppy way that they admittedly overspent really ridiculously and inexplicably on shows on Disney+. While they've lost billions upon billions upon billions on Disney+, Bob Iger is now admitting they spent at least $4 billion more than they needed to on shows that Disney Plus didn't really need to have. From The Hollywood Reporter, Bob Iger reflects on Disney's streaming launch. "We invested too much." The studio boss talked about his turnaround strategy to boost audience engagement and manage traditional TV and digital assets seamlessly. When streaming guys talk about audience engagement, they're just talking about how much time you're actually spending watching their streaming service. Nothing wrong with wanting to have more people spending more time on the streaming service, because if they do, they're going to continue to pay for it. And if it's advertising supported, they'll get more ad revenue from it. That makes sense. The rest of what Iger talks about really lets you know why Disney doesn't have an effective board of directors to check on them, to make sure their strategy makes some sense. Even some basic sensible questions to Disney's management would have fixed most of these problems. And that's what the board of directors is there to do. They should be aware of what the CEO's strategy is with whatever it is that they're doing. And the CEO should be able to back up like how they're going to execute on their strategy. That hasn't been done with Disney, and it doesn't sound like it's being done now. Disney CEO Bob Iger gave a mea culpa for big losses incurred while launching streaming platforms like Disney Plus during an investor conference appearance on Wednesday. Quote, "As we got into the streaming business in a very, very aggressive way, we tried to tell too many stories. Basically, we invested too much, way ahead of possible returns. It's what's led to streaming ending up as a $4 billion loss," Iger told MoffettNathanson Media Internet and Communications Conference during a session that was a webcast. The other thing that Iger doesn't mention here is that the pricing for Disney Plus was absurdly too low. It was low in like a predatory kind of way, where they thought they'd be hurting Netflix by having such low pricing. Did they have research and data to back up and say, look, if we price our service this low, people are going to switch off of Netflix and jump onto Disney Plus. We just have to have enough shows. Is that really what they thought was going to happen? We don't know. Iger has spoken to that before. He doesn't speak to it on this investor conference call. But he does admit they were trying to be a little bit predatory with their pricing to make it difficult for their competitors. You also have to ask, how could Disney possibly miscalculate this much? This is pretty wild mismanagement. It's not like Disney wasn't in the media business. It's not like Disney hadn't been seeing reporting on results from Netflix. They did a lot of business with Netflix before they pulled their shows from Netflix to push them onto their own platform. But in addition to that, they had operational control of Hulu. They controlled Hulu. They knew all of Hulu's numbers. They knew the content spending. They knew how successful new shows were when they were put on Hulu. They knew what library shows were most important for Hulu. How could they not learn lessons from Hulu and then apply those lessons to Disney Plus? Part of Disney buying Fox was getting control of Hulu. And with control of Hulu, they had all of Hulu's information. Comcast didn't have the same information. And when Fox was acquired, then Disney got operational control of Hulu. But Disney did have all that information. I'm not saying there was a conspiracy here. It just looks like wild, crazy, sloppy mismanagement. Some by Iger and then some by the guy who came after him, Bob Chapek. But Bob Chapek then was allowed to do even crazier things by the board of directors. And he gets into that here. Iger goes on to explain here. Iger addressed the falling out with his handpicked successor, former Disney CEO Bob Chapek, whose tenure he called out for lavish and misplaced content spending. Iger said Chapek had moved the profit and loss responsibility to the studio's distribution arm, a move he reversed on his return as CEO in 2022. Quote, when I came back, it was clear to me that the structure was not working because removing accountability from those that were basically investing the most capital was a mistake, he argues. What Bob Chapek did was really unheard of. Disney had a distribution division. Bob Chapek took his hand-picked friend, this guy, Kareem Daniel, probably a nice enough guy, worked at Disney for years. He was the president of consumer products and chief of staff for the office of the CEO, and that's a relatively important position. But hold on a second. Disney actually had a CEO that was responsible for profit and loss. So what is Kareem Daniel doing responsible for profit and loss? Here's what Disney was doing. And this is at least suspicious to me. I don't know why more analysts aren't talking about this. Disney would produce TV shows and movies, all types of content, and then sell that content to its own distribution channel. That's okay. That's not really unheard of. But what that did was that created a profit every time they produced a show for their own distribution, which they would then either decide, oh, we'll put it on ABC, perhaps we'll license something to someone else, perhaps we'll take this show and we'll put it on Disney Plus, or we'll offer it to Hulu. So they controlled all of their pricing and they controlled all of the reported profits for producing all those shows. Also, there was really no incentive for any of these different production units. So Pixar, all their television production divisions, Marvel, all of that content was produced without any kind of profit incentive. So the better that a show would do, you wouldn't get paid for it. You would make all your money just delivering your shows to this guy, Kareem Daniel. And okay, Kareem Daniel, though, really wasn't the right guy for this. As I read in an interview, his attitude was, well, it doesn't matter what happens with the Marvel shows. We could spend $25 million an episode, even though Netflix doesn't spend anywhere near that kind of money except for its biggest of biggest hits like Stranger Things. They almost canceled Sandman over that because Sandman cost $15 million an episode. Kareem Daniel's attitude was, well, look, as long as we have it in our library, we can sell it forever. But the problem with that is it's not necessarily true. If people aren't interested in seeing She-Hulk, then it really did make a big difference when you decided that it was okay for them to spend $25 million or more on every episode of She-Hulk. So as a result, they spent billions and billions of dollars at overinflated rates for shows that a lot of people are not interested in watching. So the quality of the shows was off, but the budgets for the shows went wildly out of control. The way that Bob Iger handled this sounds like it made more sense. I never saw real accounting for this. Before Bob Chapek came in and took Kareem Daniel and came up with this whole new distribution scheme, Bob Iger offered stock rewards to the heads of divisions who produced very good shows. Exactly how they got compensated, we don't really know. I never saw it reported. Bob Iger discussed this in his Ride of a Lifetime biography. But what we've never seen is a full accounting for all of this nonsense, all of this overproduction of shows at overinflated rates, and a proper reduction in the value of those shows. They've never gone and reported and said, look, we paid too much for this. We paid too much for that. We have to take a serious multi-billion-dollar charge for it. Disney has pulled some shows off their platforms, and they have taken losses on some shows, but not nearly enough, not to the extent where it's been $4 billion worth of just terrible shows. The result of spending more on content that could be turned to profit, quote, resulted in volume and not quality, which turned out to be a mistake. The Disney boss conceded volume was required to win the streaming wars against rivals like Netflix and Prime Video. But that's not true. It's not true that if you have volume, you're going to beat Netflix, you're going to beat Prime Video. Disney's never beaten Netflix. They don't look like they're going to beat Netflix. When you're talking about beating, are you talking about what? Like having more market share? Because that's not happening. More profit? That's not happening. More subscribers? Also not happening. Iger also added, there's a very fine line that you can cross and get into trouble if your volume ends up diluting management's attention to what's being made is right. And that's what's happened to us. So I have pulled that back, Iger told the conference. He's not wrong that too much volume that a management system can't handle is going to produce bad results. Instead of producing a lot of mediocre shows expensively, they produce a lot of mediocre and bad shows expensively. They could have just made great shows, but they seem to have given up on that, and that's a whole other issue. As part of his turnaround plan for Disney, Iger said he reinstalled a link between the creative and monetization sides of the studio, quote, to basically help guide what's being made, when it was being made, and where, meaning internationally. He doesn't explain what this monetization link is, but he's explaining that they're going back to saying, okay, if your content does very well, we'll make sure your production division makes extra money as a result of it being successful. I don't know how much that's really going to change anything, because a lot of what Disney's producing is getting rejected by people. People don't like Disney anymore. People don't even trust Disney anymore. Iger reiterated his respect for rival Netflix for being able to engage users with appealing content. Quote, I've been telling everybody good isn't good enough. It has to be great. Just keep driving that. But if you force them to make too much, then it becomes almost impossible to do, Iger added, returning to the thorny question of balancing volume with quality. As if they just cut down the volume, they're somehow going to have quality. If The Marvels was the only Marvel movie that Disney released in 2023, it wasn't going to improve the quality. To drive engagement, and again, engagement is just keeping people stuck on your streaming platform for the longest amount of time, Iger's evolving streaming strategy has included bundling Disney Plus with Hulu. Quote, I won't get into too many details there, but if you are a Disney Plus subscriber, for an extra $2, you can get Hulu ad-supported. The combination of those two is an engagement play more than anything else, he said. He added bundling Disney Plus, Hulu, and ESPN Plus to get all three streaming services together potentially can increase engagement to an extraordinary level. Iger also addressed his 2022 statement made when he was no longer Disney CEO, but about to return to replace Chapek, that traditional TV was marching to a distinct precipice and it's going to be pushed off. That was followed by Iger, when back at the Disney helm, announcing he was looking at all options, including a possible sale of ABC, ESPN, and its linear TV assets. He has since revised his strategic thinking around Disney's linear TV assets, he told investors at the conference, and now sees them as part of a wider slate of assets to engage consumers. Disney can't afford to sell ABC. They can't afford to sell their cable channels. They certainly can't afford to sell ESPN. Everything is linked together. They have shows that go from one platform to another platform to another platform. It's always going to be that way. They need as much distribution as they can to justify their business. If they didn't have so much distribution and they didn't have so many different cable channels, for example, they wouldn't be able to sell their cable channels without ESPN. ESPN is the anchor that pulls in a bunch of cable channels that nobody wants. They would get a lot less revenue for the remaining cable channels when they make a deal with a cable provider. But the same is true like with ABC. The same is true with the streaming services. They are desperate to always have more distribution. And then it's that additional engagement time spent on different platforms, whether you're watching ABC or one of their cable channels or a movie or their streaming service, wherever they can get you. So they're not selling any of those things because it makes the whole thing fall apart. Quote, when I came back, I did declare everything was on the table. Iger recalled a root and branch look at the studio's asset base. And I looked very expansively at traditional media. Ultimately, I concluded, and I know I mentioned the word portfolio, where it's not going to be a growth business, but it could become an important component to our ability to basically engage with the consumer, Iger argued. Along with that strategy, Iger has reduced its content spend for traditional TV networks, invested in some, and then managed them seamlessly with streaming platforms. Quote, so you have the same executives managing both, and their goal is to drive basically bottom line growth and success, Iger argued. For Disney to have the same executives managing ABC and Hulu, there's nothing wrong with that. What they do need to figure out is how it fits all together. And what they also need to figure out is how can they get people interested in the Disney brand again and get away from pushing all this propaganda? Because that's really what's killing Disney. They have all the distribution in the world. They have all the resources in the world. What they don't have is nearly as many people who used to love Disney, loving Disney today. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.